Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the IMG Roadmap Podcast. I've been trying to get today's guest on the show for a long time, probably when he was still in residency, and it's going on 3 years now. And I don't want to speak for you, Dr. Katz. Can you just give us an introduction as to who you are?
I'm a current third-year cardiology fellow with 6 months left in my fellowship, where I'll be planning to practice as a non-invasive cardiologist. I did my medical school training at Ross University, most of my rotations in Brooklyn, New York, and my internal medicine training at Hahnemann University Hospital, RIP. Before its unfortunate shutdown, and I'm excited to be a guest. I really love that you, as a side note, I really love that you created this platform and podcast, especially to focus on IMGs. That's really the focus of what I started with blogging, and how I wound up on social media was trying to help people understand the hidden curriculum in medicine and all those things that aren't in the books and that people don't really talk about. And being an IMG, it's always nice to see other people help and pave the way for others.
Yeah, it's I like the work that you do. I've been a follower of yours probably for a couple of years, followed your journey all the way through. So, it's definitely a pleasure to have you on. So guys, this is Dr. Marc Katz. He's a PGY6 currently in cardiovascular diseases, which is a subspecialty of internal medicine, because so many IMGs sometimes don't really get the delineation of maybe family versus internal medicine and what subspecialty training one can pursue after that. So I think it's important that I highlight, what that is. And cardiology fellowship, can you tell us a little bit about that, the duration and sort of generalities around what to know about cardiology fellowship?
Yeah, it's as you hit on, that's a really good point. That one of the reasons why I went into internal medicine was that it had the option and the opportunity to potentially go into so many different subspecialties, whether it be cardiology, hem-onc, rheumatology, pulm crit, whereas family medicine is just a little bit more restricted in the fellowships that you can pursue. And internal medicine is just what I kind of fell in love with. Whereas now that I'm in cardiology, after my 4 years of med school, 3 years of internal medicine, and another 3 years of general cardiology fellowship, at the end of that time, you're kind of a general cardiologist, and you still have the option to further subspecialize with a 1 or 2 year interventional cardiology fellowship, electrophysiology, heart failure is another year. And then there's also a lot of new burgeoning fields like cardiac oncology, advanced imaging. So there's a whole lot of subspecialties that you can do to kind of get further experience in a specific field and kind of hone your specialty and training. But the reason why I'm happy to be a general cardiologist is that if you're going to be an interventionalist, you got to really love, live, and breathe all those things that they're going to do. You got to really love the procedures. Similar with electrophysiology, I love managing arrhythmias using antiarrhythmic medications, but I'm happy to be the person that says this guy needs a pacemaker and send him to the electrophysiologist, who then puts it in. So I'm a little bit less of a proceduralist. I love echo imaging. It's so challenging to master, and there's a reason why our fellowship is 3 years long. We rotate through all of the different subspecialties in cardiology. I did make a YouTube video that goes into further detail about this, but we rotate through like 6 months of echo. There's different levels of training that you can get. I think I had 6 months of interventional cardiology, various months of electrophysiology, advanced imaging, general cardiology, CCU. So you really get to kind of and heart failure as well. You get an exposure through everything in cardiology so that you can graduate as a competent cardiologist.
Yeah, that's awesome that you have that information, and we'll collect, guys, just keep listening, because at the end of this episode, we'll get all his contact information and his resources also that you can visit. But let's get back into your background, because like you said, this podcast is dedicated to IMGs by IMGs. And sometimes, our listeners want to know that they can relate with you, right? They may be looking at this or watching this or listening to this later on and say, well, this guy he looks like he's an American. He looks like a, white guy who is privileged and all these other things that people think, right? Without knowing the
Yeah.
true story. And they may not feel like they relate.
Yeah.
And one of the things I do on my podcast is I'm open and honest. And I like to make people realize that we're all the same and our challenges may differ in very little ways.
Yeah.
But the generalities are fairly similar because it doesn't matter whether it does matter whether you're US IMG versus a non-US IMG due to visa restrictions and things like that. But when it comes to studying academically, you still have the same challenges, the same boards, the same experiences, the limitations that come with the bias that's associated with being an IMG. And I even realize to a certain extent, for non-US IMGs, they're given a pass when they go to foreign medical school. For an American who goes to foreign medical school, there's actually a little bit more judgment against that. Because the question is, why did you go to the Caribbean, right? And so there's just so many little nuances like that as IMGs that we have to face, and they do not help our academic progress in any way.
Yeah.
So can you speak to a little bit about your background, maybe where you went to medical school, your year of graduation, and any nuances that you faced along the way?
Yeah. I went to SUNY Binghamton for undergrad. I'm originally from Jersey, so I'm from right outside of Rutgers. So that's why I didn't go to Rutgers, to try to get a little bit farther away from home. And I'm born to I'm first generation American, born to first generation South African immigrant parents. They were born there, but I'm just boring and American. But nonetheless, I only really realized I wanted to go into medicine like my junior year. And unfortunately, I didn't really try hard enough, straight up. I wish I could say like, oh, I was partying too much in my first semester. I just wasn't trying hard enough earlier in my college career. And that put me in a GPA hole. So I kind of turned on the gas and really worked a lot harder junior and senior year. And that's when I really realized my junior year that I wanted to go into medicine. And I know that some of my friends and colleagues knew that they wanted to be a doctor from the minute they were in college, and they were trying very hard, and they took time off after they graduated. I just knew that I wanted to go into medicine, and this is what I wanted to do. I didn't want to get a postbac or work in a lab or do research. I didn't want to do something for the sake of getting it on my resume in order to get into medical school. I applied to 27 med schools, and granted, my GPA was like 3.4, which is like not terrible, but for pre-med, it's not that good. My MCAT was, I don't remember what it was, and I think the MCAT has changed, but it was like just below average. So, and I shadowed a bunch of doctors, but I didn't have extensive research or anything. I was, back in the day, the president of my fraternity, and I worked throughout college. So I had some experience, but my application overall wasn't that strong, objectively speaking. And I only got into one med school, and that was Ross University. I got like a partial to SGU, but I had to like do that trial semester where and I just said like, why would I bother doing that? Let me just go to Ross. I got in. So when people ask me, why did I go Caribbean, I got in. It's the only school I got into. And the reason why I personally took that on was because I knew I didn't want to wait and redo the cycle. And I didn't think that I was going to be able to impact my scores that much. I didn't think my overall application was going to be that much stronger in a year or two. And I didn't want to wait. And I think that's an important distinction to really make sure anyone who's pre-med and thinking about going into med school, who's American and thinking about becoming an IMG, like an international medical graduate, you might not have as many disadvantages or challenges as a foreign medical graduate who also has to deal with visa challenges. But the intrinsic issue is that when you're an IMG, certain doors shut to you. And I felt like from the beginning of med school that I was kind of fighting an uphill battle, simply because it's a little bit more challenging to match as an IMG compared to being a US grad. There are certain programs, I went to internal medicine residency at Hahnemann in Philly. I applied to the 4 big hospitals there: Temple, Penn, Jefferson, and Hahnemann, or Drexel University. And Temple is now increasingly more IMG friendly. At that time, I just didn't get the interview there. I can't speak on for them, and I think they're a fantastic program. But Penn and Jefferson just don't look at IMGs for the most part. And maybe things have changed since I applied, but all you have to do is go and look at their current residence and see where they graduated from. For the most part, Ivy League schools, depending on your specialty that you're applying for, sometimes this is not the case for certain specialties, but in general, if you're already applying for a tough specialty, you're only making it a little bit harder if you also go to an IMG, because certain doors are shut. The straight fact is that Ivy League schools mainly only take people from prestigious programs. Obviously, people from quote unquote average US med schools are still able to achieve those types of prestigious residencies, but for the most part, we just don't get them. They just don't. They see where you're from and they don't accept your application. So I think it's important to note that just because that's the case, one, you could be the first one. You could be the first person that goes to whatever Ivy League prestigious school or residency program after being an IMG. Apply. Worst case scenario, they say no. So I don't think that people need to necessarily say it's impossible, but just looking at the objective facts, they just don't look at us as much. So there are just fewer options. That being said, like, I love the training that I got at Hahnemann. It was a inner city hospital, and I felt like we were sprinting through the day every day, and I got fantastic training. And I don't think you need to necessarily go to the most prestigious program in the world. It sounds nice. It does. And if you're going to stay in academia, that continues. That prestige and that issue of trying to get a job at a prestigious place as an attending physician will continue. And the challenges as an IMG, even if you go to somewhere like a good residency university program for residency, it's still there that you're an IMG, even going into fellowship. I don't think that any program director will ever go on Word or on Twitter or on a podcast and say this outright. But all you got to do is look at their current fellows and current residents and see where they go. So I think that's the biggest thing that we have to acknowledge, that when you become an IMG as a US resident, that it's okay to go Caribbean, but you need to have informed consent. Like, you got to know what you're getting into. It's just like a medical procedure. Like, it's okay that you do this route. Clearly people have succeeded. And even when you said like, oh, this guy might not be relatable. He's a cardiologist. He's a white American. He had it easy. Like, it sounds really nice that I went to med school in the Caribbean and then residency, and now I'm a cardiology fellow and I'm going to get a job as a cardiologist, but it doesn't feel like a straight line. And there's a whole lot of anxiety and stress that goes into that. And there's so many different strategies that you need to go into. And all that I tried to do in med school is crush step one, get great letters of rec, and get to a good program in the Northeast. And then I'm sure you will probably cover this in another podcast or maybe later today. Step one, going pass fail, is going to be another weird hurdle that I'm sure program directors will maybe not be the most honest about, but I anticipate step two is just going to be even more important now. So overall, it's a long process, but I'm still happy that I went that route, and that happily and thankfully it worked out.
Yeah, I'm so happy to hear your story, because I think people need to hear from you. Like, it doesn't, like, no matter how we want to frame in our heads who has a bigger challenge versus not, just being an IMG, there's going to be some level of challenge there. And so our focus should be on how do we overcome them, right? How do we create a path, a strategy that helps us move forward, instead of, oh, woe is me, that person has it better because they're from Jersey and they have this thing lined up for them and yada, yada, yada. It's the same challenges that we're all experiencing. Yeah. So what are some key points that you think help IMGs to overcome some of these things? In my opinion, like you said, step one for me in my time and in your time was the big deal. A high step one score is all we told everybody to do so that they could get looked at. Yeah. We knew programs filtered applicants based on just that number alone. And then, talk less of everything else that comes after that, your letter writers and such. But moving forward, I think that they will move that objective standard because we always need, if you think about medicine, we need criteria, we need numbers, we need specific lab cutoffs. That's the way our brains work in medicine. We need things to just fit the cookie cutter for us to, give the diagnosis, or it's a suspicion, right? And so if we think like that every day, how is that going to differ when program directors start looking at applications? In my opinion, they're going to look at another objective standard, which would be the step 2 CK. And so, anyone thinking that they're going to get away with boards as a good thing to strategize for or toward when preparing your application, I think you're deadly wrong. But that's for my perspective. I think step 2 is going to become a new standard. I think that there are various parts of the application that matter as far as strategizing, and that's something that I teach extensively inside and outside of the IMG roadmap program. But in your opinion, what are some key areas that you maybe leveraged and that others can potentially leverage, especially given the change in the climate?
Yeah. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head that step 1 was a gatekeeper that, having, again, when I went into internal medicine, I simply looked at what is the average step score for a successful matched applicant. And I said, I want 10 above that score. And thankfully I did that. But I don't think that the score alone will get you where you need to go. All that it does is keep doors open. If you, heaven forbid, fail or get a very low score, it's just closing doors. If you achieve a great score, I'm sure there are some program directors who are going to look at that a lot more favorably than certain other scores, but all it's doing is keeping doors open. So I think, as you said, you need to still strategize and have a strong application overall and play to your strengths. And it also depends on what field or specialty you're planning on going into. For instance, there are some specialties that it doesn't matter if you're IMG, FMG, or a US grad at the most prestigious program in the country. It's incredibly challenging to match into dermatology, urology, cardiothoracic surgery. There's just some vascular surgery. I think there's only I don't know the number, but there's a limited number of spots, and every program only has a few spots per year. So there's some even US MDs and DOs have similar challenges. And unfortunately, there's a great nephrologist that I follow who on Twitter who talks about the challenges of changing step 1 from a score to pass fail. And unfortunately, I think that it's going to see the effect of making step 2 have more weight. I mean, back in the day when I applied, my USMD and DO counterparts often didn't take step 2 because they were like, what's the point? I took step 2, made sure it was part of my score, and also passed step 2 CS and made sure that was in there just so that I could have extra, look at me, I know my stuff. I think that when you're making step 1 pass fail, which factually should be, because it really isn't testing how smart you are, it's just testing, do you have enough knowledge to potentially be a medical doctor? That's how the test was created. When you change it to pass fail, we're adding on more layers of complexity. I worry that if someone's going into dermatology, are you now going to be not mandatorily required to do a research year, but if everyone else who matches does a research year, we're delaying that timeline for those people who are going into those fields. So I think it's going to become increasingly competitive. Thankfully, and hopefully, programs and specialties like internal medicine might not require that. And that's where I have most of my knowledge from, since I'm an intern, a trained internist. I think the crux of it is that the 3 things I always tell anyone who asks me, what are the 3 things that I need to match? Good scores, good letters of recommendation, and a wholesome and complete resume, meaning research of some kind, maybe leadership, some volunteer experience. Those were the 3 things that I did. I was part of some clubs in med school. I volunteered at blood pressure clinics during my clinical years. And regardless of what specialty you're going into, I think it behooves you to reach out to your attending physicians, residents, and fellows that you're working with, and communicate with them that, hey, I'm interested in this field. I'm planning on applying to this. Do you have any, the magic words are, do you have any research that you're working on that I can participate on and be an author? Because I've seen other people also get burnt where they do research and then they say, sorry, you didn't do enough to become an author. So I always specify, like, I would like to be an author on your paper or your research. And I hope that by doing that, by doing research, it shows your commitment to the field, it shows you're going above and beyond. And I think that when you do research, presentations, you really learn a lot more about a field. You know, I think the old adage is the expert in the field is whoever's reviewed the PowerPoint the night before, because whoever does that research paper is going to know, you know, you have to read like 20 research papers in order to get like 2 citations in order to know what you're talking about. So I truly think that it does show a lot of drive to have good research, good scores, and good letters of rec. I think you can't get above that. And for letters of rec, it's not the most important thing isn't like that you get the president of the United States to say, yep, he should be in a residency. You got to know someone who knows you well and can write on your behalf. Like I saw he or she exhibit, I saw them exhibit these characteristics over this time period and give you like a really confident, good letter. I think those are the 3 things you got to do in order to really set yourself up for success. Good scores, good letters, and some research.
I agree 100%. Like I am right there with you 100% on those points, because I mean, that's the bottom line at the end of the day. You said something about step 2 CK, which actually stroked my mind, because I'm thinking, you know, this episode is probably going to come out the same week where USMLE becomes, or step 1 becomes pass fail. And it's, you know, I know this is going to be a hot topic. So it's great that we're talking about this, because then we're offering a conversation that will be beneficial for our listeners who are probably, you know, nervous and, you know, intrepidation, worried about what the future might hold.
Yeah.
But I've seen an increase in holistic applications as much as, you know, just looking at score cutoffs. Like currently, I mean, I'm currently located at University of Tennessee, Knoxville. And I've talked to a few program directors passively who probably don't know that I run this podcast. And there's an increasing desire to want to review applicants holistically. But what the feedback they give me is they get a lot of competitive applicants too, because people are working harder, people are saying all the right things. And so at the end of the day, you know, they have to look at things beyond just what's on paper, because you can make a great CV, but when you interview, how do you interview? When, you know, your personality, when they meet you, how does that transmit across? So there's just some other pointers, but obviously to get to that point, you need to first have you know, made the cut. And obviously we like to focus on the podcast about making that cut, that initial cut. So really some really good points that you've laid out here for us. Now, moving forward, say, you know, for the next couple of years, just looking at the future of IMGs in medicine, do you have any sort of, you know, guesstimates or estimates as to what you think that our impact or presence will be like? Or do you think it's going to get more competitive? Do you think it's getting better? Do you think it's getting worse? Do you think it's hard to assess? What do you think the future of IMGs is at this point?
Honestly, I don't know. The thing that continues to assure me or reassure me is that every stage of my training that I've been in, from being med school in clinicals, residency, and now in fellowship, everywhere that I go, I meet other med students, residents, fellows, and attending physicians who trained at all the major Caribbean schools, foreign medical graduates who did their, which, by the way, always blows my mind and makes me appreciate what we have, that these other doctors trained, did their residency in a complete other country, are full-fledged attendings, and then come here and are told, like, do it again. Like, I don't know if someone said, like, Mark, we lost your paperwork, you got to do residency again. That would be another question. Yeah, might be like, I'll take the refund check, please. But you know, I really am reassured that I think that when we talk about like the stigma of the IMG, I see it every once in a while when I'm on Reddit or if I get lost on the internet and in some type of thread talking about the stigma. I think the stigma isn't real in real life, in day-to-day life. I've never thought when I'm working with another doctor or or any type of healthcare professional, like, where did you go to medical school? And if anything, whenever you get to know your colleagues and you find out so many of them are international medical graduates, there's a certain connection that you get, that like, oh, you went to Ross too? Were you in Dominica? Or were you back in, were you on the cruise ship for that couple semesters? Or are you now in Barbados? So, and even with some of my closest friends from residency were SGU, AUA, AUC, like, so and at the end of the day, I think for years I might be wrong on these numbers. I can't quote me for a fact, but there's already technically enough US graduates to fill every residency spot. And yet they continue not to, because certain US grads don't want to go into internal medicine or some of the specialties that are in high need. And I foresee that IMGs and FMGs are here to stay. And I hope that we are, because we continue to fill a very underserved need in a lot of specialties that are underfilled and need more people: pediatrics, family medicine, internal medicine. I mean, every specialty, but I do not foresee us going anywhere anytime soon.
I agree, because when I look at, I always put it this way: there's always going to be an IMG that matches. Okay. Like, no matter how you want to look at it, whether the number is going up or down or staying the same, there's going to be an IMG that's getting into residency in March of each year, and so on and so forth until the end of time, because there's always been, when you look back. And past performance is always predictive of future outcomes, we think. But at the same time, I'll be hard pressed to say that IMGs are never going to make an impact in the US medical system, because like you said, there's so many times at work that I've ran into people, we've talked, and then you really get to know them and you realize, oh yeah, you did, go to for medical school, or, you're from another country, or whatever the case is. But it's never the first thing. It's never, my orders don't get fact checked as to, hey, did you go to career medical school? Orders are invalid, right? Like,
Yeah,
that's
I don't even know where my doctor went to med school.
Right. Exactly. Like, nobody cares. But we've built this stigma amongst ourselves because, yes, there has been bias, there have been issues, but I think we should not, make it bigger than what it really is, and focus on ways that we can individually improve our personal portfolios, our academic strengths, and work on those parts of application that need the most help.
Yeah. And I think that we already hit on this a little bit, that although I say in day-to-day life, there's no stigma, the application aspect of it is still real. Like, I have to caution that, like, the US MD and DO match rate is something like, I don't know what the most recent stats are, but it's like 92 and 96 or 86%, whereas the IMG match rate is like 52%.
Yeah.
And the people who generally, I don't want to put them all in the same boat, but generally the people who are US graduates who from US MD or DO schools who don't match, maybe they're applying to neurosurgery or something like that. Exceedingly competitive specialties. Often that's the case, and a small minority are ones who truly something goes wrong and they don't match. Whereas 52% of IMGs not matching, I think that just objectively tells you again that it's an uphill battle and that you have fewer opportunities and options, but it's not impossible.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for coming on and spending some time with us today. Really appreciate you doing this, because I know you have a busy schedule. I can only imagine. But I just thought of a question that I know some people are going to want to know. I think probably I've only had a pediatric cardiology fellow before on the podcast. So you may be the first adult cardiology fellow to have had a cardiologist interviewed in the past. So you're more current with what it takes to get into fellowship. So let's just touch a little bit on requirements for cardiology fellowship as it pertains to being an IMG, or even not. What are the general things that, maybe someone's in med school right now listening to us thinking they want to be a cardiologist, but they're so overwhelmed with just becoming an internist that they can't even see ahead. So can you just speak to that application process and what that is like? And does it even matter if you were an IMG when you did? And if it did, to what extent?
It's so the first thing I'll say is that often med students or who are applying for residency will say, like, I'm interested in XYZ fellowship, doesn't matter, should I be going to this program that has that fellowship? the first thing, first and foremost, is you need to, it sounds super corny, but the best specialists, the best cardiologists, gastroenterologists, hem-onc docs, rheumatologists, whatever it may be, are first and foremost great internists. And the first thing that you need is good training. So getting a competitive, good, and very strong internal medicine residency program is your number one goal. Matching into residency is what you got to do. Don't put the shoe before the horse before the carrot. Get the residency first and then worry about the fellowship. Ideally, if you can clone a program that you got into and it has the fellowship you think you're interested in, great, that's awesome, because at least that's a program that you can potentially work directly with that program director, do research with them, do research and get to know the cardiology faculty that are probably going to be the ones who are picking who's going to be their future fellow. So ideally, sure, if you're interested in cardiology, it would be great for the residency program that you're going into to have a cardiology fellowship. But I think that also is a marker of how much of a university program and what tier of a residency program you're going into. That if you're going into an internal medicine residency program and you're the only residency program at that hospital and there are no fellowships there, it's probably not as university driven compared to the program that has internal medicine, OB-GYN, emergency medicine, surgery, and all of their separate different types of special fellowships. So once you're in residency, the things that you can continue to do is research. Like it pains me so much that you have to do so much research, and it's tough to say what type of research. I think most program directors understand, in med school and in residency, you're not going to be publishing a randomized control trial. They know that you have a limited amount of time. For fellowship, you're applying at the beginning of your third year. So you really have to, in residency, like internal medicine, you have to figure out how to be an intern. At some point, take step 3, thrive and survive, and then also take on some research and publish it. And there's different levels of research that you can do. Obviously, if you can be the author on a randomized control trial, that's great. But short of that, you can start out with case reports at your institution, case reports that could be published at a conference, whether it be a regional one. Obviously, the bigger the region, the better. Regional, the statewide one, the Northeast, American conference, an international conference. So the bigger the conference you can publish in, the better. Above a case report could be a case series, some type of literature review, and then on top of that, other types of research projects, retrospective or prospective ones. And it's funny that it's not just the research you do in residency. I remember I was applying for a job, and they looked at the research I did in med school, and they were like, "Wow, it's really great that you're interested in this stuff." And in my mind, I was like, I loved, and I still love all that stuff. But people still look at it, and even when you're interviewing, everything carries through. That you can see a pattern of you've always been interested in going above and beyond and doing all that. And it's a little bit of the same thing with getting into residency. You need great letters of rec. You need to also play that political game where medicine's a small world, and fellowships are even smaller. If you think about all the program directors, there's a limited number of them, and they all kind of know each other. And, a phone call from your mentor can go a long way. And I think that's one of the biggest things in residency is finding a good mentor. One of mine was a gastroenterologist who I published research with. And we just had similar interests in looking at social media in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, and we ran with it. But it's also important to hopefully get people who are mentors in your field to help you advance in that field and grow as a professional in different ways. And I think that's one of the things that people lose sight of is just get good training, get that research, and you need to publish as much as you can. But the relationships you build within medicine is so critical, because again, if you make it your mentor making a phone call for you can be so huge. And to share, I actually had to soap into fellowship. So I matched into residency, thankfully. I'm applied for fellowship, didn't match. Thank God I had an amazing program director who made a call for me and got me an interview at, there were 7 spots not filled. 2 of them were at like Harvard and some other prestigious place. Those were gone within seconds. There was only like 1 in the Northeast, made me a call, made a call for me. And I'm forever grateful for him. And that's the other thing that I would look for people looking for a good residency program. You know, how open is the residency program coordinator, director, to helping you? What have they done to advance your career and make a change in the program to benefit you in your education? So all suffice to say, in order to get into fellowship, more research, good letters, and good relationships. And you know, you can look at the match data as well, and fellowships are getting increasingly competitive as well. And the reason for that is that there's only so many spots. And some of the more surprising ones that are becoming more competitive are like hem-onc, rheumatology. The ones that have always been competitive typically are also higher paying: critical care, critical care, gastroenterology, cardiology. And that's partially because more and more people are applying to those spots. So if there's 1 to 1.3, you know, 1 position for every 1.3 applicants, the more applicants that are applying, the more competitive it's going to get. So I think it's only going to get harder. So try to get a good mentor and do some good research, and good luck.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for expounding on that. We're about to let you go. We're getting to the end of the podcast, but we want to know 2 things. The first thing is, what is your last piece of advice? And usually some people choose to share like their mantra for life, or what works for them, as far as, because us looking in, we're like, you are successful. You have finally gotten to the place in your career where you're about to be done. And there's a limitless sea of possibilities ahead of you. And many IMGs will literally give anything to be in your position right now. So what are some things that you hold near and dear? Maybe it's a value system, a virtue, a faith belief. What is the secret sauce for Dr. Katz?
It's funny that you say that, because you know, I think in 6 months when I'm a cardiologist, and even now when have less than 6 months left in my fellowship, it's always nice to reflect and be like, you know, for the last decade, I've fought to try to get to the point that I'm at, and just reflecting on that. And I think in medicine, particularly because it sometimes demands it, it's very easy to get lost in it, to forget that there's life outside of medicine, and it's okay to have hobbies and interests outside of medicine. And I think that what I wish I did more was just enjoy the process a little bit. You know, just try to keep in touch with the people who helped get you to this point, and try to just have fun along the way. And if I could tell my younger self one thing, it would have been buy, you know, all of the Ethereum and hold it. But you know, I think if I had to come up with a mantra, as corny as it sounds, it's like peace comes from within. And just simply that in medicine, you're going to deal with a lot of personalities. And for some reason, the culture of like reaming people out is still there sometimes. And you're going to have tough days. And, you know, it's not that you can't let it get to you. You know, we're all human, but I think it's trying to master how you let that impact your mood and your outlook and the rest of your day. You know, you can't let one bad interaction ruin the rest of your day. And in medicine, it's going to be challenging working with a lot of different people, a lot of different specialties, and communicating effectively with those people. And sometimes you come across someone who might just be having a bad day and they take it out on you. And just trying to keep a positive attitude, and not keeping a positive attitude and neglecting to acknowledge what happens day to day, but making sure that you know, you impact the outlook you have makes the environment around you more positive.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. That's I'll definitely keep that one close to heart. Peace comes from within. I'll have to remember that when I'm in the ER next week, because definitely coming back into training, you revisit with these uh, I don't know, I want to call them demons of medicine, where it's like, you go from I went from being an attending and having everything under control and sort of being the leader of the pack to being a fellow again and having people doubt my decisions or
Yeah.
question things that I did, or seemingly there's always an ego trip.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, that's
and
why I went into cardiology, because I already had the ego. So I was like ready to go.
yeah, right. So it's like, there is definitely room for building peace from within,
Yeah.
because you need to have your own barometer for what makes you happy and what makes you peaceful and what makes you settled, so that when you do encounter these moments, and they're small and they're few and far between, but they could be demoralizing. When
Yeah.
you do encounter these moments, you have something to fall back to. So I really appreciate that. Now, everyone's going to want to know, where can they find you? How can they connect with you? What resources do you have on the internet? You talked about Twitter. I know you're on YouTube. I know you're on Instagram at kittycatmd. But can you give us some specific URLs where we can find you on the internets, and how to connect with you?
Yep. You can stalk me across social media platforms at kittycatsmd, KITTYKATZMD. I was going to change it ages ago, but my last name's Katz, and then it kind of like was, a simple one, and now it's just like taken a life onto its own. So Kitty Katz MD, Instagram and TikTok are my most frequently used, right coming up in third place with YouTube. I'm on Twitter, but I mostly stalk there. And my blog is mykittycats.com. I've been meaning to change that URL, but life gets in the way. So again, mykittycats.com for kind of blog posts about medicine, how to study, how to get into residency, interviews with some of my colleagues, and the challenges as IMGs and some of the things they faced. YouTube, where I go into a little bit more detail about cardiovascular disease and expounding on the importance of various things like Lyme carditis, how to take your blood pressure appropriately, life in the day of a cardiology fellow, should you go to a Caribbean med school, and what are the challenges intrinsic in that. And Instagram and TikTok, a little bit more of bite-sized information, all sharing the life of a cards fellow inside and out of the hospital.
Yeah, so we'll have all Dr. Katz information, guys, for those of you watching and listening. If you're watching this, just scroll down at the bottom here. You're going to find his URLs. You're going to find one click to his Instagram, and we'll have to get your TikTok, because I'm not on TikTok, but we'll link it down below as well.
My quick push is, if you're doing what you're doing on Instagram, just keep doing it on TikTok. It's the superior platform. I hate it. I hate saying it, but it's just, Instagram is.
Yeah, Instagram. Yeah, maybe this may be my cue to sign up for TikTok. But definitely we'll have all his information down here below, so you can one click and contact him, YouTube and everything. We want to keep this IMG network growing. So guys, feel free to reach out and let us know if you enjoyed this episode. Leave us a comment. You do have a cat. Oh my God. How perfect is that?
I promise I didn't get her just for the name, but
oh my God, you do have a cat. What's the cat's name?
Pepperoni.
Pepperoni. I thought it was gonna be Kitty Cats. That's awesome. That's fitting. So that maybe explains. So which came first, the name or the cat?
The name.
The name, certainly.
I helped. I was always a dog person growing up, and I one of my very close friends from residency finally got a cat, and I was like, "Huh, I could use some attention." Yeah. And then I got her, and it didn't work, but now I have a cat. I love it.
Now you have one more responsibility. Yeah. Well, I'm glad that we got to meet Pepperoni. And for those of you watching video, if you're listening on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, you just missed this. So go to YouTube and take a look at Pepperoni. You definitely want to see this.
You can also follow her at pepperoni.thecat.
Oh my gosh, she has her own Instagram.
Well, I knew that I would post too many pictures of her on my Instagram, and I was like, my friends are gonna hate this. So
yeah, so she does have her own Instagram. We'll put her URL down below as well. I love this. I'm here for all of this. All right, Dr. Katz, it was nice chatting with you. I wish you the very best the last 6 months. Yeah. Final run. And I know you'll do extremely well, and I'll keep watching, keep stalking. Maybe you can come back in a year or two and tell us how it is, the life of a cardiologist, and maybe some reflections from everything, having a whole 360 perspective.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Thank you again for having me, and thank you for doing everything that you do for the IMG community.
You're very welcome.